Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful Fringe event on building the black economy. It's great to see all of you here today, especially taking the time out to talk about this important discussion. This is an SME for Labour event sponsored by LOWICK. Feel free to please live tweet throughout the whole Fringe activities. Make sure you're @ing SME for Labour, LOWICK, and our wonderful panelists who are here to speak about how we build the black economy, how we invest in our SMEs, and how we get the policies through central government, through the local level, and encourage businesses and innovation in our communities. So without further ado, we'll go to our wonderful panelists. Starting with our wonderful MP, Flo Eshalomi MP for Vauxhall. Welcome. We also have today, give her another round of applause. There we go. We also have Karl Lokko, the chairman of Black Seed. We also have Abdul, who is the co-chair of Camden Youth Safety Task Force and former Camden councillor. And our very own in local government, deputy leader for Wandsworth Council. And last but not least, myself, Anthony Okereke, the current leader of Greenwich Council. Thank you. So, we want to go into a few introductions from our panelists today. We'll be taking questions at the end and going through some of the ideas and things that are happening to build a black economy. Today, I'm going to hand over to Adam Hyde to open with a 3-minute introduction about what he thinks we should be doing. Abdul.
Thank you so much, Chair, for the introduction. And I think some of you will be aware of challenges that the black businesses are facing, especially at the time of pandemic, at the time of uncertainty. There are elements of discrimination, elements of racism, there are elements of conscious and unconscious bias, and we have to tackle these structural inequalities to ensure that black businesses are able to thrive. And I just wanted to give you some stats and data to sort of contextualize the challenges that black businesses are facing here in the UK. So according to the consumer research outlined within the Black Pound Report 2022, it talks about a value of 4.5 billion, which is missed due to lack of products available within the marketplace for black communities. It is a significant monetary value of those communities' spending power. Unfortunately, these are sort of missed out both locally and nationally. You're all aware of the challenges that COVID-19 has revealed and shows the exacerbated socio-economic disparities for black-owned businesses in comparison to their white counterparts. So, for example, the research conducted by All-Party Parliamentary Group on BME Businesses Owners in 2022 clearly shows that during the pandemic there are grants available by local authorities to support black businesses, all businesses, including black businesses, even though in most cases the stats are around about 68% of black businesses applied for grants from local authorities, only 32 succeeded. Again, there is a clear disparity between the white counterparts and the black businesses. Again, black businesses face challenges securing funding. So when they apply for loans, they're almost 25% more likely to be refused compared to the white counterparts. In terms of with people accessing their services, again, there are lots of different challenges. And I think there's a role for us at both a local and national level. So, for example, setting up community wealth grants, working with, like, for example, Black Pound Day, a black-led business initiative which supports black businesses. Perhaps we should consider partnering with some of those organizations, but also having grants and support at a local level. But most importantly, one has to look at tackling structural inequalities. I mean, there's a piece of work that I did in Camden during COVID-19, looking at sort of the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on black and Asian ethnic groups. There's a report called Building Equal Foundation that really outlines challenges for supporting black businesses, to housing, to health. I mean, the whole thing is just it's there, laid bare for people to see the stats and data. And I think you need a commitment on equalities. And I think we have to move away from equalities, because equality is about treating everyone the same. If we know that black businesses and black communities are being put in a disadvantage, I think we need to be in a space of equity, and that's where we will make real changes.
Thank you very much, Abdul, and particularly drawing out on those disparities that some of these businesses face, and the ideas that we need to put forward to kind of challenge those disparities. And I want to go to Kemi now, because Kemi, you're not just a deputy leader, but you also run a charity, right? So speak about that. Let's hear about that.
So I also run a business and a charity.
Oh, there we go.
So I was going to say I'm actually a black business owner. I run a business called Brixton People's Kitchen. It's a series of low-cost community shops around the borough of Lambeth, due to open, they're all due to open, reopen some of them in the next couple of weeks and months. I totally agree with everything that you said. I was going to talk about Black Pandemic as well. I'm really championing that in one step. So we promote that. That's one of the things that we can do. We have a Black Business Directory as well, where we champion Black businesses. And next month, which is Black History Month, we're actually utilising some of our empty, well not our empty, but some of the empty shop spaces in a local shopping centre and repurposing them just for black businesses, because one of the issues that they also face is tenure. So being able to showcase and trial your business in a shop actually helps you see if it's a viable business. I think also the other things that we need to do is educate people that having your own business is a viable career, and you can do that in a variety of ways, like championing businesses that are already running. That doesn't involve you knowing what businesses are in your borough, but championing those businesses, using some of them as mentors for young people, and enabling the young people to see that business, running your own business is really a viable job and a way forward. Other things that I think are really important is having a variety of businesses available. Now I live in Tooting. Tooting has a very high Muslim population. As such, we have a lot of Muslim and Hindus. We have a lot of clothes shops for Muslim people, halal butchers, loads of halal butchers, in fact, and they're really catering for the people in the borough and those in the ward, and those are the people that live there and make their own shop in businesses that really reflect them, usually people that work there, but also reflect their needs and wants. Have I got more time? I also have a cabinet portfolio for voluntary sector business and culture. So I know you're talking about how we can support businesses, but I think it's important that we also remember that the charity sector is also a very key partner for businesses. Some of the work that charities do actually are quite business-like, although maybe you'll have a charitable angle, which is also championing black-owned and run charities and things like that.
Thank you very much, Kemi. And I particularly like the point that you teased out about the lack of secure tenancies, but also the point of how you address that through meanwhile use and interim facilities like that. Now, Karl, you're currently the chairman of Black Seed, and so what's your thoughts on how we almost build our black economy and support more black businesses and SMEs?
Sweet. Do you know what, before I get into the meat of what I see to be the solution, a little bit of a backdrop of myself. I've been afforded a narrative that highlights systemic failure. Yeah? So the front end of that, I was diagnosed as a child genius, did my year 9 SATs in year 6. And and then ended up subscribing to gang activity and gang involvement. Got heavily involved in that, was very fortunate to be able to get out of that. And then via doubling down, because I knew I'd done my 10,000 hours when it came to relational power, I doubled down on the network, and I have now what I refer to as acquired nepotism, yeah? Which again is a systemic failure, yeah? And that being said, I've been able to churn out and create things and manifest things that most of my peers are unable to, i.e. the latest iteration of that being a £10 million fund, of which I invest exclusively into black founders in the tech or tech-enabled companies. And that being said, the reason why we exist is because we are a response. And it's my response also to the question, of which is to broker the dislocation between the black community and funding, whether that's for not-for-profits, whether that's in terms of SMEs, whether it's debt, whether it's whatever it be. I mean, there is a bias and there's a racialization of everything, which has put the black founder, the black entrepreneur, the black employee furthest from the throne room. So to basically answer the question, we just need more funding and less mentoring, because we know what to do.
And we didn't get to tease it out, but I was wondering if you could talk just about Black Seed as well, and just more about what it's doing.
Yes, sweet. I mean, so we exist as a £10 million fund, black-led for black founders. We are early investors, meaning we get in usually when it's just a founder or two co-founders and give that first ticket, which is very important because that's usually referred to as the friends and family remit, and whose friends and family can give them 250 grand, you know. But that being said, we give them that initial investment, but also a wraparound component. So we have offices in Brixton, South London, and also in Greater Manchester for our up north portco, which is portfolio companies essentially. And so we give them 6 months rent-free occupancy in those offices. We also have a startup manual of 110 steps, of which our scale-up specialist is the ex-COO at SoftBank. He's our operating partner, and we just try to give them as much of an opportunity and a runway that they'll be able to scale essentially and churn out these black generational-led companies essentially, you know. So that's what we exist, and we're in Brixton. We're not leaving from Brixton. We're rooted in Brixton, but we have global ambitions.
Thank you for that, and I heard Flo go here, almost. And Flo, I presume you must be in daily conversations with small medium enterprise, black-led businesses in Vauxhall. You know, how is it we invest in them? How is it we build them up to make sure that they're thriving and successful?
No, and I think it is important because if we are honest, if we look at what happened during COVID, we saw that some of the inequalities that we knew already existed, a light was shone on it. And when you look at the fact that the government was offering contracts for businesses to stay afloat, how many of those contracts and funding went to black-led businesses? They're the same businesses who continue to be disproportionately impacted when they go for funding on high street banks. They're the same businesses that without friends and family putting in that seed funding, they wouldn't even get a startup. And setting up your own business is not an easy challenge. And you see black-led businesses saving for years, putting in sweat and tears. In some cases, people risking their homes to make this dream a reality. And I think what I was so inspired by was during lockdown, seeing so many young black-led people saying, do you know what, I've had enough of the 9 to 5. They were seeing their family members die from this disease, and they were thinking, life is too short for me to be stuck in this 9 to 5. I have a dream, I have a vision, and I'm gonna start doing business. And what was so good about lockdown? other fellow black people were supporting them. It's so important that we just don't support those black businesses and starting up. We support them by shopping in them. We support them by not asking for discounts, people, because they are businesses. We support them by going to their launch. We support them by referring them and making those recommendations to others. We support them by submitting and filling out those Google forms and those reviews, those positive reviews. Because I think one of the things that we've seen is that if you look at an industry like the black hair and care industry, that is worth £88 billion in the UK. But yet how many black-led salons and shops, I'm talking to my sisters and my brothers here, in terms of those shops, how many are black-led? That's a sector that businesses could be tapping into. It's a sector that employs so many people. We look at the food industry as well in terms of black businesses, the turnover in some of those restaurants, but yet they'll face barriers and hurdles when it comes to planning, when it comes to licensing. We need to educate black businesses that when you start, it's not just about doing things how you do it back home, it's about following some of those rules and regulations to make sure you are successful. It's about speaking to those black-led businesses about why you should have your licensing hours correct and you're not selling alcohol past 12 if your licensing only says 9, because you will be called up to the planning and licensing committee where councillors that look like you will revoke your license. It's not because we don't want you to succeed, but there are rules and regulations. It's about the fact that if banks aren't lending to those businesses, how are we having those conversations? But equally, it's about us at a local and national level looking at the issue of procurement. We saw businesses getting contracts during COVID. If you text the right cabinet member, how many of those businesses are black? And we're talking about contracts worth billions, contracts to people who had no business in private public procurement and PPEs, but yet they were getting contracts. So we need to see a sea change in how procurement is happening. 1/3 of government funding goes on procurement. That is more than the NHS budget. We need to have a sea change on procurement. Some of the jargon, some of the forms, some of the bureaucracy that makes it so much harder for black-led businesses to get a say. We know that for some local councils and local government departments, they've got their preferred contractors. How many of them are black-led? How do we look at the supply chain locally? And if we're talking about sustainability, some of those black-led businesses will be the ones who employ local people. They'll recycle, they'll reuse those tools, they won't ship from abroad. So, you know, there are so many benefits for using local black-led businesses. It shouldn't just all be about the size of your profits. It should be about your social responsibility, your outcome, your environmental outcome, how you are treating your workers. These are all the things that we need to talk about when we're looking at how we can better support black-led businesses. And Abdul mentioned Black Pound Day. It's really, really important we support initiatives like that. And we shouldn't just support initiatives like that on Black Pound Day. We shouldn't just support black-led businesses in Black History Month. I'm black all throughout the year. We need to look at how we support those businesses 365 days a year. And sometimes it's not just about financial support. It's about how could we work with local councils in terms of having those businesses on their directories. How can we look at advertising? How can we speak to some of those big key advertisers in terms of promoting some of those new startups and those initiatives? There are so many ways that we can look at supporting black-led businesses. And I think the key one is looking at, making sure that there's access to finance, that there's fair transparency and changing the rules around procurement.
Hey. Now, Flo, I love the fact that you mentioned procurement because it's a very visible inequality when it comes to black businesses. But within that, there's still very invisible inequalities. And I want us to almost interrogate that a bit more. What are these barriers that businesses particularly face? Kemi, I want to ask you, because you mentioned before about secure tenancies. What other barriers do some of these businesses face, both invisible and visible and invisible barriers? And let's interrogate it a bit more.
Well, my industry is food, so I'm going to talk about food. I know Flo was talking about jollof rice just before we started the camera. And I think think that's actually let's talk about planting actually, because I remember planting is something that is it's a staple food, but recently, which was last year, recently, I remember seeing a small bottle of planting being sold in Shoreditch for like £5 or £10 or something. I don't know if you call that appropriation, but when I saw the people who were selling the planting, I wondered why any of my brothers and sisters hadn't done that before, hadn't seen that as an opportunity, and actually done it first. So I think there's an element of, I think there's an element of us recognising and valuing the skills and our culture, and then in a way sort of like, I don't understand, not abusing it, but kind of turning it into a business, and making the most out of it, rather than allowing other people to do that on our behalf.
No, that's a very good point about valuing skills, and I think it's almost important that procurement recognises that as well, right? Karl, talk to me about those invisible inequalities that we see within that impact black businesses, that stop them from progressing. What are those barriers?
I mean, they're huge, actually. I mean, maybe to add a bit more colour. About a year ago, when Black Seed was still a twinkle in the eye, I used to sit down my team in the morning and I say we have to move, operate, react and respond as old, rich white men in every interaction. And that's been a huge battery in my own back. But there's a few barriers to that, and I mean, they are systemic and historic. They're extremely high, and they're the most hostile towards the black entrepreneur in the UK. But that being said, an invisible one is just a reptile brain. I mean, human beings, I mean, we see someone and within the first 8 seconds, we put them either in a category of indifference, or this is a friend, or this is danger, or this is someone I would like to mate with. You know, and that being said, if you are black, there's a lot of unconscious bias, automatic assumptions that would put you more in the danger category. And it doesn't have to be danger in terms of life being at threat, but a danger to one's business, introducing the wrong culture. You know, there's subtleties such as being able to say mate on the work floor, but unable to say bro because one is deemed to be inappropriate and the other one's received, you know? So, I mean, if we're talking about the invisible barriers, I reckon it's mainly also around those networks. You know, there's a lot of closed communities, you know, and these closed communities, it doesn't matter how great your pitch deck is. You know, I mean, warm intros is what makes money move on earth, and especially within certain groupings. And even if it isn't certain groupings within society, and we're not talking around the warm intro, you need to be warmed up to the processes, you know, so whether it be that you are bidding for a certain bit of funding, I mean, if you are unaware of what might commit suicide en route to that pot, you know, by maybe not putting in certain keywords, you know, I mean, there's a huge dislocation. So in terms of the invisible barriers, I would say it is down to the wider society's interpretation on what the face of entrepreneurship looks like in this country and across the world. You know, we have a catalogue of convictions in terms of white entrepreneurs and white founders, white male founders, to be more precise, because that has been the allocation direction. In order for them to start up and to scale up, they have received the funding, the financial incubation, the economic empowerment. And without that, you can't churn out companies of a certain note. Yes, we would like to live in an ideal world where every company is funded by customers, and that is everyone's kind of like dream. But usually to get to a point where you can have enough affinity with your customer base or create a product that is serving them in the best way, it is going to take a bit of funding. So again, it is around allocation and the hostility and the racialization of every single financial institution which will be led by white males, essentially. So that's the biggest invisible barrier, in my opinion.
Thank you. No, thank you so much, and I think you've really spoken well on that issue about these systemic barriers, but more importantly, about the lack of access to networks. It's such an important thing, and it brings me to that almost thing about what is working, what works. Abdul, what currently is working within this area? How do we break down those systemic barriers that seem to compound over time?
I think there are various different approaches that you can take. So, for example, as earlier when I was speaking about sort of work around the Black Pound Day, how many of you aware of what Black Pound Day does? If you can raise your hands. Good. So the Black Pound Day, it's an organisation, national organisation that supports Black-owned businesses. What that does, it provides mentoring, financial support, business planning, and sort of taking a holistic approach. So in Camden, where I was a former councillor, we worked with Black Pound Day to support Black businesses, to ensure that they're able to progress, developing business plans, having necessary funds, having necessary marketing strategies. So in a way that provides much more of a holistic support. These are the things that can be done at a local level. There are things in Camden that we've done, a project called Rebel Business School. What that does is that organisation goes and works with schools and with local disadvantaged residents coming from Black and Asian communities. It provides them entrepreneurial supports, gives them mentoring support, gives them a package with financial support. And again, these are opportunities, provides platform for Black individuals with the Black communities to use those infrastructures to go and set up businesses. We also worked in Camden, we worked with the business community, where we worked with the issue around affordable workspace. That's really important, because if you want to set up your own businesses, you have to have a place or a base. In Camden, we work with local businesses to offer affordable workplaces to Black and Asian communities for 6 months. So 6 month free works placement within a co-working space where we kind of put them in touch with the relevant industry. So if you're into tech business, then they'll support, find someone from a tech background to support you and mentor you and to guide you. But the key thing is, you can have initiatives, but there has to be a commitment in both the local and national government about tackling structural inequalities. So in Camden, we had the first ever Director of Equalities in London. So if you want to support your Black communities, if you want to support your disadvantaged communities, if you believe in tackling structural communities, then proof is in the pudding. Local authorities have to put in the infrastructure and support, and most importantly, work with the communities to find out what are the challenges. That's the same approach that we took in Camden to engage with dialogue. Of course, we had access to stats and data, but the stats and data tells you one story. The experience of those communities is so important, and they need to be heard. That needs to be a continuous process. My last point on a national level, there has to be a commitment, because look, we're here talking about the same issue. My father's generation probably talking about the same issue. I don't want my children to say to me, well, what did he do for us? Why? Why is this structural inequalities? If we have the stats, data, if we have the mechanism, we must start putting long-term solutions. And I think there needs to be a national task force looking at structural equalities, looking at through a cross-party with the necessary means to enforce. You have to hold people to account. Why there is inequality, where are the gaps, and what we can do about them. And that needs to happen both at the local and the national level.
Fantastic. You've segued us onto the national point, which I really want to address. We're going to go to questions soon, but please feel free to live tweet, feel free to @SME for Labour and LOWICK whilst you're doing that. But I do want to tease at this point about national, and go to you, Flo, and talk about, how do we ensure economic growth? What policies do we need to see from central government to ensure that black SMEs and businesses can be supported? What needs, almost, how do we give justice and equity within policy to make sure businesses can thrive?
Well, it's not by lifting bankers' bonuses, that's what. It's about actually looking at how we invest in local areas. If this government mantra of levelling up means anything, it has to mean levelling up in terms of diversity and diversification, because we can't just see money going from key regions that generate the wealth in this country being, I do believe in redistribution, but you can't level up the UK by levelling down London, and I'm speaking as a London MP, and I think that's one of the things that this government are currently doing, this anti-London and anti-urban areas rhetoric, where we see more black and minority ethnic people. I think one of the things, again, I talk about procurement. Yesterday, Angela Rayner, our deputy leader, announced, if we have a Labour government, we will see a national procurement plan where companies are being rewarded with government contracts. Companies who actually pay their tax. We look at the fact that so many big multinational companies are avoiding paying tax. Some of the digital online companies as well, not registered here, but yet that struggling high street and business, that small black-led entrepreneur who's even trying to get a space, let alone a premises, they are paying their taxes, they're employing local people, they're paying more national insurance for their staff, but yet you've got big organisations trying to evade the tax even though they're making more money. So I think it has to start from the government setting and changing the legislation around that. I think another one is around being honest about some of the racism that structural racism that's still in place. We saw the government announce their shambolic report last year, basically saying there is no racism. We know that there is, and it's about being honest to talk about, yes, there has been progress. Yes, there has been some areas where black and people have progressed. But actually, we know that there's structural racism and those barriers still exist, that unconscious bias when you are a new person approaching your bank for a loan. The terms, something as simple as the terms and conditions attached to that loan are different to the terms and the conditions attached to some white-led organisations. We've got to be honest about that. We've got to be honest about some of the jargon and the hoops that people face in just trying to get some money, that startup seed funding, and Karl touched on it in terms of that's the hardest part. Someone believing in the vision that you have. Hence why so many people turn to families and friends. But actually, if you've got access to government ministers, you can get contracts. All of that needs to change, and it has to change by the government recognising that the playing field is not fair. The playing field is there's many inequalities addressed in it, and I think we have to legislate to change some of that.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I love the fact that you talk about levelling up by diversity. It's very important, a procurement plan that is inclusive via legislation. Now you've talked about the weight of national government, and Kemi, there's a lot that can be done on the local level by virtue of weight. How can local councils begin to support some of these black businesses to ensure that they can prosper from economic success locally?
I think we're doing it already.
I agree.
I think we're doing a good job. I mean, this year, people voted in seven councils, which basically means it's the most diverse Wandsworth has ever been in its entirety. And to reflect that, we've been bringing in a lot of policies, including actually writing an equalities policy, which didn't exist before for the council, if you can believe that. So we're doing that already. Other things that we're doing is, the council has some money, so we have a community grant, and next year when we release our equalities policy, we'll be having a special strand, which is just for supporting black entrepreneurs. I don't know if you know about John Archer. Anyone know about John Archer? First black mayor in England, came from Liverpool, and then was the mayor in Battersea. So it's going to be named after him. But something I also wanted to bring up is, these funds just for black people do actually exist, but they do have all of these criteria, such as you must be, you've used the word disadvantaged quite a few times, not all black people are disadvantaged. Actually, you know, sometimes, well, we're just not always disadvantaged, so that doesn't have to be a criteria. And I think, like, again, the thing about COVID that actually showed us, we don't need a workplace, we don't need an office. We can work from home. What people do need is an address. If you want to put your address in a company's house, what people need is an address, but we don't actually need an office. So that workspace is, you know, good and bad. The other thing I think that would actually really help is if to reduce some of that risk of starting that new business is if other businesses sort of hosted new businesses, reducing all the worry that people have, just so that they can trial their business, see if it works before then going on. And also that enables you to actually get more funding when you have a pilot under your belt. When you do go to funders, they're more likely to fund you. But overall, if you don't know about any of these things, you don't know about the funds, and you don't know if anyone will host, or even if another business hosting you is an opportunity, then you're not going to be able to do it. So it's about people knowing and sharing that information with others.
Awesome. Give her a round of applause. That was great.